The lights in the studio buzzed faintly overhead, their sterile glow bathing the glass-walled set in an almost surgical coldness. Cameras rolled in silence, and technicians whispered behind control panels. At the center of the polished desk sat a man dressed in immaculate Western tailoring, his notes stacked like weapons. He cleared his throat theatrically. Across from him, seated with posture neither rigid nor slouched, was Captain Ibrahim Traoré, his military fatigues looking out of place among the studio's gloss, yet somehow more real than anything else in the room. The journalist leaned forward, voice dipped in condescension wrapped as curiosity. Isn't it true that Burkina Faso lacks the sophistication to manage democratic stability without foreign guidance? The words dropped like a blade. The air shifted. A pause. Then Ibrahim answered, his tone even. When truth offends power, it's not truth they question. It's your right to speak it. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was damning. One producer dropped their gaze. Another tapped an earpiece, unsure whether to cut the feed. But the cameras kept rolling, and Ibrahim didn't blink. This was not just an interview, it was a reckoning disguised as conversation, and what followed would echo far beyond the glass walls of this broadcast room. Before the studio lights came on, the system had already cracked, but the world hadn't seen it until now. Years before Ibrahim Traoré ever walked into that interview, whispers of foreign puppeteering had lingered like the harmattan dust over Ouagadougou. Gold-rich soil was stripped clean, contracts handed to foreign entities under the guise of development. Meanwhile, schools collapsed, clinics remained unstaffed, and protesters disappeared in the name of security. Footage rolled in a flashback. Government officials shaking hands with French diplomats under crimson carpets behind closed doors. A voiceover from a dismissed activist played faintly. We begged for schools, they gave us bullets. Back in the present, the studio technician adjusted the gain on the audio, palms sweating. Even behind soundproof walls, truth made its own frequency. The journalist now asked, do you really believe removing French forces made your country safer? Ibrahim, eyes fixed and voice low, responded, the land only grew quiet after their boots stopped speaking louder than our people. Across the globe, in homes and cafes, the feed was being shared. But the rot ran deeper than headlines. A former reporter recalled how a damning report on foreign-backed corruption was shelved indefinitely. A local radio station was burned the night after it aired a segment questioning the whereabouts of missing community leaders. Ibrahim wasn't just pushing back, he was pressing against years of engineered silence. Behind the scenes, producers argued in hurried whispers. He's changing the rhythm, one said, and he's doing it without raising his voice, another replied. A clip played. A grieving mother standing by a grave with no name, whispering, they called him a rebel, but he was just hungry. The world began to shift, not from declarations of war, but from a man who refused to entertain dishonesty with theatrics. And somewhere between the blinking red light on the camera and the clenched jaw of the interviewer, a system that once spoke with unquestioned authority began to lose its language. The interview's tempo shifted like a subtle tremor before an earthquake. The journalist's tone, once confident, now strained for coherence. He pushed, visibly unnerved. What qualifies a man like you to lead a nation on the edge of collapse? The pause that followed wasn't hesitation. It was precision. Ibrahim tilted his head slightly, his eyes quiet fires. Pain, he said, and the refusal to pass it on. The words didn't need emphasis. They landed, heavy and unmoving. In the control room, the producer's fingers hovered over the cut button, but didn't press it. Something told them no one would forgive them if they did. Ibrahim continued, not with rehearsed rhetoric but memory. I've seen young men die for borders they didn't draw. I've seen mothers trade silence for safety. What qualifies? Me? Maybe nothing. Except that I never learned to lie to my own people. The journalist tried to pivot, a feeble swipe. France has invested billions in your infrastructure. Ibrahim interrupted, his voice razor-sharp but still measured. Contracts are not compassion. Loans are not liberation. The room froze again, not because he was loud, but because the truth stood undressed between them. At home, the broadcast replayed across thousands of devices. A young boy in Dakar replayed the line. A teacher in Accra nodded silently. A disillusioned voter in Lyon leaned forward, unsure why her chest tightened. The journalist's face now betrayed him. Red under the makeup, fingers tapping nervously. He looked at his notes, but they had lost their weaponry. You're reframing. Everything, he muttered. No, said Ibrahim. I'm returning it to its original frame. The camera zoomed slightly, not on the interviewer, but on Ibrahim's face. No smirk, no satisfaction, just the solemn bearing of someone too familiar with struggle to take pride in being right. The moment crescendoed, not with shouting, but with the absence of it. For the first time, the journalist looked small. His words ran dry. And across the world, the silence that followed became the story. Not a soundbite, a turning point. By the next morning, the interview had become more than just trending. It was in classrooms. It was in street protests. It was being quoted by leaders and carved into graffiti walls. The studio issued a statement calling the exchange unexpectedly powerful. But behind the scenes, the truth had hit harder. The journalist sat alone in a dark apartment, scrolling through a storm of public commentary. Every attempt at self-defense sounded hollow. One message from his daughter, unread but glowing on the screen, simply read, "Maybe now you understand why I left." Meanwhile, Ibrahim was back in Burkina Faso. No press, no grand announcement. Just a visit to a rural school where desks were being painted by children using donated brushes. One girl approached him with a notebook in hand. "They say you made them listen," she said. He smiled gently, then corrected her. "No, you made them remember." Narration resumed, tracing the slow unraveling of arrogance. The journalist's name stopped appearing in headlines. Invitations to speak dried up. His old clips were dissected, reframed as relics of a tone-deaf era. In one neighborhood, a neighbor who once praised him now turned away as he passed. But the story didn't end with shame. It ended with recognition. People began questioning old narratives. In France, a university announced a new course, post-colonial media ethics. In Burkina Faso, a journalist who once feared state retaliation stood on air and said, "We are no longer afraid to name the truth." Final shots slowed. A coffee mug, untouched on a desk. An inbox filled with silence. A group of school children drawing flags that didn't need foreign signatures. The last scene returned to Ibrahim. He stood on a hill outside the city, wind moving through tall grass. A reporter asked, off camera, "If you could say one final thing to the world, what would it be?" He paused, then spoke, voice calm. "Freedom doesn't come when they give it. It comes when you stop asking." The screen faded to black. A heartbeat later, the only sound was the quiet hum of change, and the world, for once, was listening.